Hello, I'm back on camera because I've got a bunch of books to show off. This is going to be my first review of a Bentley Little novel called The Mailman, but before I get to that I want to introduce what is going to be my next series of reviews on this channel. Last year I reviewed all 35 Richard Mailman novels and I published a review of each one, and at the end I did a ranking video, and several people have asked for the equivalent of Bentley Little's bibliography, which I'll get to because I do like Bentley Little a lot. And I have most of his books here in this house. The ones that I don't have are either in a different place at my mother's house, or I have them on order. His last 3 books are pretty hard to come by, but I have recently ordered them all and they will be here shortly. So before I get to the review of The Mailman, I just want to do a little introduction to Bentley Little and his work. Firstly, let me show the books that I have here and which I'll be reviewing. His first published novel was The Revelation in 1990. It won the Bram Stoker Award for Best First Novel. After that came The Mailman, which I'll be reviewing today, his second published novel. There was a book after that, I think, called Dark Dominion, which I don't have here. I do have it elsewhere. But for the ones that I have in this house, next comes The Summoning, his longest book to date, kind of his take on the vampire story. Then came University, also known as The Night School. Then The Ignored, which is one of his most highly regarded books. Stephen King's a very big fan of this. After that came the first book of his that I ever read, called The Store, which I have in hardback. One of the biggest mistakes I made as a collector was giving away my paperback original copy of this, because it's very hard to come by now. It sells for a fortune online, and it just has a really fantastic cover art. But anyway, so I do have this hardback cover of it, The Store. Then he wrote The House. After that came another one of his highly regarded books, The Walking. After that came The Association, and then The Return. A lot of these books are difficult to come by now. I picked them all up when they were published, and I could probably sell them for a bit of a profit. The Policy, one of my favorites of his, at least that I remember back in the day when I read it. The Resort. And now we're getting into kind of the later part of his career. The Burning. The Vanishing, and then The Academy, which is quite similar to University in many ways. His Father's Son, and The Disappearance. And the last book of his that I have here is The Haunted. Right, well, he also has a short story collection called The Collection, which, if you're new to Bentley Little, start with this. It's not easy to come by cheaply, but it's a fantastic collection, and it will give a window into what a quirky, eclectic imagination he has. I mean, there's 32 short stories in there, and they really cover the whole gamut of horror. You've got serious, poetic, literary horror stories here. You've also got funny, quirky, larky stuff. So the collection is really great. Pick it up if you can. Right, okay, so today I'm going to be talking about The Mailman. And before that, who is Bentley Little? Born in Arizona in 1960, a man after my own heart in his interests. He's a huge fan of progressive rock music, and his books always reference things like Jethro Tull and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Pink Floyd and stuff like that, King Crimson. His books can really be divided into two types of two categories. The first type is he writes almost like social satire novels, where they're all basically the same thing. They feature some instrument of government or capitalism, which is picking apart communities and societies and atomizing them and turning them against one another. And it looks like Bentley Little is not a big fan of authoritarianism, certainly, who is, but especially capitalism and conformity. Books like The Mailman, which I'm about to review, The Policy, The Association, The Store, The Resort, they're all basically exactly the same story. I haven't read his previous 3 that are on order, but even from the titles, I can kind of guess what they're about. You know, one is called The Consultant. I'm guessing it's about a consultant who worms his way into some family's life. Another one is called The Handyman. Taking a wild guess, it's about a handyman who's evil and he does all crazy stuff to the house. And the final one, which he published a few months back, is called The Bank. which I'm going to go out on a limb and say is about an evil bank, in the same way that the store was about an evil store. If it sounds like I'm being dismissive, I'm not. I'm just warning you that Bentley Little isn't somebody that I could binge read as I binge read Richard Layman. So for this series of reviews, what I'm going to be doing is I'll read 2 or 3 of Bentley Little's books and review them, but then I'll take a little break and read somebody else and review that, and then come back to him, because, you know, with Layman, he's very easy to just binge read. He's so simplistic, his writing places zero strain on the intellect. Even his bad books you can burn through in a weekend. But Bentley Little is a different kind of writer. He's a little bit more dense, he's richer, he's got more ideas going on. And when he has a bad book, and he does have some really bad ones, they're not that easy just to plow through. They do take a bit of time and effort. And for that reason, and because he can be so samey in some of his works, I do think it's necessary now and again just to take a break from him. So this isn't going to be like the Richard Layman series, where I just did only him for about 7 or 8 months. This series of reviews will take a lot longer, but I will eventually get through all of them. Right, well, with that out of the way then, The Mailman. Let me show off the cover art firstly. It is by Simon Dewey. And Simon Dewey is, or was, one of my very favourite horror artists who worked for Headline Feature. He was also the artist for Ramsey Campbell. He did stuff like this on The Long Lost. Sorry about the glare. He also did this great cover art for The Parasite, and one of my all-time favourite cover arts here, The Doll Who Ate His Mother. All of this is Simon Dewey's work, and as I've ranted before, you know, the big horror publishers, they just don't go to those lands anymore. It's all boring, arty, generic stuff. But anyway, The Mailman, here we go. I'm not going to read it as usual because I'm on camera, but I will just hold it up to the camera. Hopefully it will focus. You can pause it and read it for yourself if you want. But what I will do is summarize it for you. Right, so what happens here is it's set, as all Bentley Little books are, in a small town in Arizona. This small town has just lost its mailman. He died in mysterious circumstances. Well, he killed himself. And so they got a new mailman. And the new mailman, right from the off, is a very creepy looking guy. He's very pale, very gaunt. He's got this crazy red hair. He's got a very sinister way of looking at people and of speaking to people. He's got this unnatural self-confidence and control. And he's delivering the mail earlier and earlier and earlier. In the end, it's like 3 in the morning when he comes by. Very odd person, and odd things in town start to happen. Firstly, when he comes, everyone likes the new mailman because they're only getting good mail. They're not getting any bills. They're only getting good news or letters from long lost relatives or friends who they've lost touch with. So all is good in the world. But after a while, things start to insidiously change, and people start to get very disturbing mail. It can be, some people get like very horrible photographs, sexual photographs or torture photographs. Some people are getting letters from people who've been dead for a while, but it seems like it really is from them because it's information only they could know. And in the end, what happens is the town turns upon itself, and, you know, people are getting letters supposedly from their neighbors criticizing them. And so after a while, the whole town begins to disintegrate as man turns against man, woman turns against woman. It's very, very similar to Stephen King's Needful Things, which was published the same year, 1991, in terms of you've got this weird stranger who arrives in a town, sets people against one another, brings out the animal in them, brings out the paranoid, isolationist, bitchy, infighting characteristics of humanity, all the bad things about us. They kind of draw all those out and suppress all the good stuff about us, and before you know it, anarchy has overtaken civilization. But our main group of characters, our main hero here, his Doug and his wife Tricia and their son Billy, they catch on that something is not right in town, and they set about fighting back. Right, it is an absolutely archetypal Bentley Little book, this. It's his second published novel, but it sets the scene for what would follow. I love it. I very highly recommend it. It's one of his best books. And what I like about this is that it contains almost everything that makes Bentley Little great. Firstly, it's a quirky idea. It's not difficult. It's not complex. But it's a rare talent that can take a simple idea, and rather than make it what it maybe should have been, a short story, stretch it out to a 440-page novel. But there's never a dull moment. It's never boring. There's never anything which I thought was just put in there to pad it out, whereas some of his later work, there is tons of that. This is just a page turner, to use the cliche. I read it in 2 sittings, and I like the way that Bentley Little can create creepiness from tiny details. I think I mentioned already the fact that this guy, is mentioned that he doesn't sweat, which might seem like a simple thing and not especially frightening thing, but the way that Bentley Little introduces that is really well done, because he depicts very well how horribly humid and swelteringly hot this Arizona town is, and everyone else is sweating buckets, but this mailman is just completely unaffected by it all. He's just completely dry. And I was reminded of that detail in Stephen King's The Stand, when one character sees that Randall Flagg doesn't have any lines on his palm. It's a tiny thing, but it's a really clever way of setting aside this character as something alien, something very, very foreign and different, and inhuman. One thing which I should probably say, if you've not read Bentley Little before, is there are 2 ways you can go into his books. One of them is expecting realism, and the second way is to suspend all disbelief. I strongly recommend you do the second one, because Bentley Little's books, people behave in ways that real people would never behave. Their reactions to very obviously supernatural events or insane or crazy events are not what you or I would do. And very often you'll find yourself screaming at the page at characters saying, why on earth don't you go to the police, or why don't you leave town, or how can you not see that there's something odd going on here? You're not going to have a good time with Bentley Little if you go into his books expecting some kind of realistic characterization, realistic human reactions, but you will have a great time if you understand what he's about. He tries to write very entertaining stories. He will get some social commentary in there now and again there'll be this very obtrusive commentary that he'll throw in about other writers or rock groups that he likes, where it's almost like it's obvious Bentley Little himself has just decided to have his say on some issue, and it breaks a bit from the narrative. But yeah, the point that I'm trying to make is that for example, there is a scene in this where, when about a week after the mailman arrives, the post office itself has changed, and where once there used to be posters on the wall advertising books of stamps depicting great American heroes of history or great American moments in history, instead what they have now is there's a big poster of Adolf Hitler, and you can buy a book of commemorative stamps for Hitler. Shortly after that, there's a big poster showing sadomasochistic sex, and you can buy a book of stamps depicting sex scenes like that. You know, in the real world, if you walked into a post office and saw that, you would do something about it. You wouldn't just pass it off. And it's funny, because the police in this are completely incompetent, impotent, passive. They keep saying things like, yeah, but there's nothing we can really do because he's not broken any federal law. No. Believe me, if your postmaster puts up a poster of Adolf Hitler in an American post office, there is something you can do in that situation. Trust me on this. If there's another scene where one of the characters guns down 14 people, and the police are like, well, let's keep this among ourselves. We don't want to get the state police involved. Let's keep this, even in America, I think if someone were to shoot and kill 14 people, it would make the news. And there's just little details like that where very bizarre things are going on, but it seems like no one really cares all that much about it. People are so passive. People don't fight back in ways that you would in reality. But that can be a flaw of his towards the end of his career, when he was relying on that stuff, when it was getting too silly, too ridiculous. But here, it's not actually a bad thing, because, like I say, if you take this for what it is, a lark, a damn good time, I think Bentley Little wrote this with a huge grin on his face, as he did all of his greatest work. Just go with it, go with the flow. If you do that, you will enjoy it a lot. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say about The Mailman. I think I've roughly told you what the story is. I don't want to say any more about the story. There's not a lot more to say, to be honest. That's it. Weird mailman arrives, does crazy stuff, town starts to disintegrate, they fight back. There's some very, for him, good commentary towards the end on the how tenuous civilization is. I mean, lots of writers have dealt with this subject before. Richard Layman himself did it in a book like Quake. But he does show just how easily and simply civilization can disintegrate and become anarchy, and how suspicious people fundamentally are. It looks like this mailman, this character, has no real motive, like Leland Gaunt in Needful Things. He just does this for his own amusement. People are his playthings, and it amuses him to see how quickly he can turn people from civilized creatures into uncivilized animals. I like that. And at the end, Little does throw in some interesting commentary on that theme. But again, it's not obtrusive. It's not like this didactic lecture that he's throwing in. It's just, it's there if you want it. The thing about subtext is, it should be there if you want it. It shouldn't beat you over the head. Right, I'm starting to ramble and I have to go back and do some work now. That's why I'm dressed like this. The Mailman from 1991. Very, very highly recommended. One of his best books. I will be back soon with another Bentley Little book. Don't know which one, but I'll be starting it tonight, whichever. Until then, take care of yourselves. It's Friday now, so have a good weekend. And I will talk to you again soon. So bye for now.